And good morning. Welcome into the Out of Bounds Show. Morning Drive is driven by your next GMC Sierra truck, pre-owned or new, or GMC Yukon, Fowler GMC, Pearl Brandon. Visit FowlerGMC.com right now, FowlerGMC.com. Number one selection of pre-owned and new GMC Sierra trucks and Yukons. We're live in the Bank Plus studio, Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone ESPN. It's game day. Cowboys Eagles. We welcome in Cowboys Insider Ed Werder, who we talked to last week about the big show on Netflix, America's Gambler, Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson, and all that. And then, Ed did great telling us some unbelievable stories, and I could do that for like six segments with him. But the next day, Micah Parsons is traded to the Green Bay Packers for 2 first-round picks and 30-year-old Kenny Clark. So, Ed, did you think that this deal would get resolved? Were you surprised when it broke that Micah Parsons was going to Green Bay?
Yeah, I think, Bo, that everybody was surprised that this was how Jerry Jones chose to conclude the drama that had been playing out with Micah Parsons over the entire offseason. And it was surprising for a lot of reasons. One is this is really the first time that Jerry Jones, in his 36 years of owning the franchise and being the general manager, has moved a player who is plays a high-value position, who's a proven superstar at the position, who's only 26 years old, and I think made the same mistake that Jerry benefited from so many years ago when the 49ers traded Charles Haley to Dallas and launched a dynasty here, in that he traded him within the NFC, traded him to the Green Bay Packers.
Unbelievable.
And that's a team that obviously has ended the Cowboys season with, some of their best recent teams. 3 times in the postseason, the Packers have beaten the Cowboys and ended their year, and they play the Packers in Week 4 this year. When I asked Jerry if he had any misgivings about keeping him in the NFC with a contending team that you might have to go through to get to a Super Bowl eventually, he said the only teams he excluded from consideration were the NFC East teams. And so Jerry didn't have any problem with trading him to Green Bay if Green Bay made the best offer, and clearly the Cowboys feel like that's exactly what happened. Jerry apparently suddenly had this epiphany about the importance of run defense, even though it's been a priority at least the last 2 years of Mike McCarthy's era as the head coach, and they failed to address it properly. And even though when they had the draft, the Cowboys knew that they were light on the defensive interior and waited until round 7, 200 players had been picked before they took 2 defensive tackles, only one of whom made the final roster, Jay Toya. So yeah, it was a surprise that it turned out that way. And I think you can make the argument that, after all Jerry did this offseason to invest in Brian Schottenheimer's success as a first-year head coach, he undermined him here and has almost assured that the Cowboys will not be a playoff team this year, in my opinion.
Wow. Ed Werder, Cowboys Insider on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. How in the heck do you first of all, trade him when you did and not before the draft, 1.
Right.
And then 2, Ed, how do you trade him to an NFC team like you just said? I mean, how does this happen?
I think it happened, simply because the Packers. Jerry said that when they identified what they wanted in the trade back from Micah Parsons, and he claimed to have thought about this as far back as when he appointed Schottenheimer the head coach, which was in January, and thought about it again, around the draft after he met with Micah and felt like they had reached the parameters of a deal, directly had a handshake agreement on most of the major points, and in his mind the thing was done. But if you have any thoughts at all about trading him and improving your team, you do it, like you said, around the draft. That's when teams have the most salary cap space. It's when you can create the most competition, receive the best offers, and apply whatever you get back in terms of draft collateral to improving your team right now.
Right.
And so they really obviously failed to take advantage of that opportunity. Jerry said when they looked around, what they wanted was they definitely wanted somebody on defense who could improve their run defense. And so that limited the scope of teams. They had to be somebody outside the NFC East. They had to be somebody that had cap space to accommodate Parsons' contract, willing to pay Parsons, to be the highest paid non-quarterback in football. And Green Bay certainly was, by $7 billion a year, made him the highest paid non-quarterback in football.
Hello.
And so that's why he went to Green Bay. They liked Kenny Clark, and I think I'd say this, Bo, if there's any opponent, any game you'd rather have Kenny Clark playing defensive tackle than Micah Parsons rushing off the edge, it's this game against the Philadelphia Eagles because they're such a prolific run team, the best running team in football.
No question. Ed Werder talking Dallas Cowboys on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, brought to you by Cover Source Solutions, HVAC and plumbing. Residential and commercial, locally owned, Mississippi grown, CoverSourceSolutions.com. Ed Werder with us. Goodness gracious. I mean, all right. So when they talked Jerry Jones and Micah Parsons, it was basically old school. I follow you on Twitter, and you were talking about, hey, that was done maybe back in 1996 or something, and maybe even up until maybe 2010, but probably not. Where you kind of got with the player and you could hotbox them a little bit, Ed. I mean, walk me through. But this day and age with Todd France and Mulgeta, or however you say his name, these guys aren't going to go for that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a preposterous notion that you can meet with a player like Micah Parsons, and Jerry's described him as being as intelligent a football player as he's ever, been around, and sit in the office with him and, go through numbers. And while you might agree on that, it seems like at that point you would then say, okay, let's call his agent, David Mulugeta. He's a very prominent agent. And let's say, okay, here's where we are with Micah. Where do we go from here to finish this? Because, Micah, the players don't know about cash flow.
Sure.
And they don't know about first and second year payouts. And, there's all kinds of, they don't know what's guaranteed under what circumstance. That's what the agent's for. That's why Micah Parsons is paying David Mulugeta. And why Jerry Jones just stubbornly refused to ever engage the agent is really beyond me. Now, he said it was because he explained at the press conference that, hey, Micah and I, I moved off, my first offer. I gave him this, that, and the other as he requested. He called us back. We made more modifications to accommodate him. I got Steven involved, and then all of a sudden the agent's like, okay, let's start negotiating. And we're like, we already negotiated. But he didn't do this with Ezekiel Elliott. He didn't do this with Dak Prescott. He didn't do it with Zach Martin. And he didn't do it with CeeDee Lamb. Like in every case, he's negotiated with the agent. So why this had to be the exception, I don't understand. I guess in Jerry's mind, that he felt like, one, Micah Parsons is reneging on the deal that he negotiated with me directly. Two, notwithstanding that, he's now at training camp, but he's not practicing and he's not honoring the contract he's already under, the fifth year of his rookie deal, because he's signed. He's supposed to be practicing and getting ready to play Philly. So I think Jerry felt that way, and Micah felt like, hey, I'm not going to risk, my career and play on this contract for an owner who won't even call my agent, as he's done for every other player. And Jerry and Steven really had no apologies for the approach. In fact, Steven said they'll continue to do this and noted that, hey, we only do this when the player is comfortable doing it. There are a lot of players who will tell us, hey, I don't want to talk about my contract. That's what I have my agent for. Please call him. And that's the direction they go. But in this case, Jerry drew a hard line. He took it personally, and I think ultimately he's hurt his football team.
Oh, no doubt. Ed Werder on the Out of Bounds show, NFL Insider, Cowboys Insider. We're talking Micah Parsons trade. Last Friday it broke, and he will stay in the NFC and go to the Green Bay Packers. And they play week 4. Is that in Dallas, Ed, or Green Bay?
It is in Dallas. It's a Sunday night game in Dallas. It'll be the ultimate circus. God. And it was funny. CeeDee Lamb was asked about that, and he said, I hate it. It's weird. It's terrible. And then he said, I just hope he's not in the backfield in 2 seconds, making a sack of Dak Prescott. And Jerry Jones, I thought his best line at the press conference was in a similar vein, in that he he said, what are you expecting when you play Micah Parsons week 4? And he said, well, I'm going to recommend that we get ahead and we run the ball.
Unbelievable. Ed Werder on the Out of Bounds show. Okay, so how would you've been following this franchise for a long time? It's always a circus, and I feel like they're always making poor decisions. They'll make a few good decisions, but they don't. The Eagles and the Lions now, as you know, and the Chiefs and Ravens and 49ers they don't operate like this. So how would you describe Dak Prescott's reaction when he has to be the face of the franchise and always answer the questions of everything that's going on in Jerry's world and life? Ed?
Well, he was pretty nonchalant about it. He certainly did not criticize Jerry Jones moving on from Micah Parsons. He seemed to downplay the significance of it within the locker room, as far as the message it sends to the players, a week away from starting the season, playing at the world champion Philadelphia Eagles in a very difficult, hostile environment tonight. Dak didn't indicate that this in any way compromises what he thinks his team is capable of. I think you got the sense that because he went out of his way to talk about Kenny Clark as being a great player and a veteran, a man, you got the sense that he was among the people in the locker room who, didn't totally respect Micah, didn't, think he was a leader, and obviously didn't think he was an indispensable part of the team. The guys who contradicted that were CeeDee Lamb and Trayvon Diggs, who's his closest friend, who said, hey, there were definitely players on this team in recent years, including last year, who are no longer here, who were jealous of Micah, who, suffered for the success he enjoyed. But Dak certainly did not put it in those terms. If anything, he was supportive of the front office decision. And you can say that maybe that's because Jerry bought him, because he's still the highest paid player in all of football, which Jerry mentioned multiple times during the press conference.
Yeah, he can't help himself.
I doubt Dak loves that, being the constant way his owner refers to him. But yeah, Dak was not critical of the move. He wasn't critical of Jerry, and he didn't indicate that he thinks that they need to adjust their expectations.
So I don't feel like they have a direction. They'll do things where you think, oh, they're cutting, they're going for the future. But then they'll re-sign, like you mentioned, they just re-signed a corner last week. They've got Dak, CD re-signed, so on. So it's like they're all over the place. Is that fair,
yeah.
Ed?
Yeah, I think so, and I think when you're making the commitment you have to Dak Prescott, that a year after you sign him, he's still by $5 million a year the highest paid quarterback based on average salary. You made the enormous commitment to CeeDee Lamb, last year. You drafted Tyler Booker at right guard to play right away as a replacement for Zach Martin. When you have Dak Prescott, you need to be all in. You need to be trying to win a championship in his window. And he's, 32 years old. He's missed 2 of the last 5 years with a significant leg injury requiring surgery. So time's kind of running out. And maybe that was part of the incentive ultimately to acquire, draft picks. They have the second most cap space in the NFL to New England now. And they are the only team in the league with multiple first-round draft picks in each of the next 2 drafts. So if they wanted to draft a quarterback at some point in the near future, they're in a pretty favorable position to do so. But, yeah, I just don't think they have a philosophy. I mean, they went into the offseason believing they were going to, extend their partnership with Mike McCarthy, and that didn't work out. And so they pivoted and made Brian Schottenheimer a first-time head coach at the NFL after, nearly 3 decades as an NFL assistant. He didn't even expect that. He thought he was leaving the organization to become a play caller somewhere else.
Wow.
He told me he was shocked to be back in Dallas and certainly didn't expect to have the opportunity to be a head coach. He deserves it, I think, with what he's done. But, yeah, there's just – are you rebuilding? Are you trying to win now? What exactly is this? And they're playing the team that they should be modeled after, and yet they couldn't be more at the opposite end of the spectrum than the Philadelphia Eagles. Howie Roseman's been aggressive, in the trade market. They went out in free agency last year and got Saquon Barkley and Zach Bond, 2 All-Pros. They are very proactive in identifying and signing their best players. And the Cowboys, they always wait until they're setting the market at various positions. And so while they should be modeling themselves after the Eagles, they seemingly do just the opposite.
And I have to laugh, because I'm a big Dak fan, and so that evidently I don't cry. Ed Werder, NFL Cowboys Insider on the Out of Bounds show. We've got Cowboys Eagles tonight, and the Cowboys are still all over the place. All right, so I want to switch gears. I've got to go back to America's team, The Gambler, and his Cowboys on Netflix. Again, you're all in the show, which is really cool. I didn't know so many of the things that were going down during that time. And I was in high school and college, so it's so cool to be able. And I finished it, by the way, over the weekend, and it was really good. Did you know about the White House, the house that Michael Irvin and them had, and where they would throw parties and so on? That was right behind Valley Ranch, Ed.
Yeah, I think most of the media was well aware of it, but there was just no way, to prove what was going on there, because no player was going to talk about it. In fact, as you saw, 30 years later, only one player was willing to talk about it and acknowledge it for what it was, and that was, Michael Irvin. I do remember, we asked Nate Newton about it at one point, and he sort of laughed it off and said, "You guys, you want to, we try to do the wrong thing the right way. In other words, they're not out at clubs, like they're not soliciting women at strip clubs. They're doing it in a private situation." And Nate said, "We tried to do the wrong thing the right way, and you guys still want to criticize us, for it." And players were well aware of what was going on. And I remember one very prominent player asking him about, how they got caught. And he basically said, "Well, they have this house in a residential neighborhood near the facility. You can see it from the practice fields." He said, "And you would think that they would, maintain it and make sure it looked like all the other houses." He said, "No, instead, the grass is 15 feet high, and, they got to send one of the equipment guys over or one of the operations guy over to mow the lawn." And it's like these guys are being way too conspicuous with this thing. But yeah, only Michael Irvin would even acknowledge the existence. And he went into some detail about what transpired within those walls. So, yeah, but we all knew about it.
We had a listener.
Difficult thing to report.
Yeah, I bet. We had a listener call in yesterday that had been to the house in 1992 or 3. So I thought he was visiting somebody out in Dallas and ended up in the White House during the kind of prime time of that run. And he told us a little. He didn't go, off the grid, so to speak, as far as what he was telling us. But it was wild that we had a listener that had been there.
I remember a line I had. I never obviously got to publish it because of the restrictions. We did things very ethically at the Dallas Morning News, and not that you don't hear, and I can share it here, but not there. But one of my favorite lines at the time was, you remember, the Cowboys are winning Super Bowls, so they're going to see the President Clinton every year. And I used to say that President Clinton's really upset with Jerry and the Cowboys because he's had the Cowboys to his White House and they've never had him to their White House.
Oh, I love it. That's great. Ed Werder on the Out of Bounds show. All right, last one, I think. Aikman, here's what I didn't realize that you knew. Aikman loved Switzer right at the beginning because he had made the call for him to go to UCLA when he got hurt at Oklahoma. However, once he realized that it was going to be a very lax approach and the accountability and discipline wasn't going to be there, Ed, it drove Aikman mad. Talk about that.
Yeah, it obviously created a lot of stress. And Aikman actually was willing, I think, to give Barry a chance because of the positive experience he had with him at Oklahoma, even after, Troy suffered that injury that led to him to transfer. He was, grateful that Switzer had made a call to Terry Donahue, the UCLA coach at the time, and helped put him in an ideal situation where he performed and had the opportunity to play well enough to become the number 1 overall draft pick. But I think he was surprised at, Barry had been retired for 5 years, was very comfortable, never really had any ambitions to coach in the NFL. And I think Troy thought when he came to Dallas, he had just lost his competitive edge over, the Barry Switzer that Aikman had known when he was recruited to Oklahoma. And the fact that, he didn't discipline players. There was no structure. Aikman only knew one way to win. He knew he had an appreciation for how hard it was because he went 1-15 his first year. He was 0-11 as a rookie starting quarterback. And so he knew how hard it was to win in the NFL. And the only way he knew to win was the Jimmy Johnson way, which is structure, discipline, order, psychological mastermind, motivating players. And Barry was just the opposite of that. And so, Troy was very frustrated because he was now in a position as a player of trying to hold teammates accountable, and that shouldn't be his role. And it creates an unfavorable dynamic in the locker room when, there were some players there certainly who didn't have the work ethic of Troy Aikman and who welcomed the opportunity not to be pushed so hard, by the coaching staff. They thought they deserved it after what they had endured with Jimmy, even though they won Super Bowls as a result. They didn't think it was necessary. And maybe they learned that it was when they played so poorly to start the championship game in San Francisco under Switzer when they got behind 21-3. But that really, led to, you saw the Aikman screaming at Jack Riley, the offensive coordinator at the time, on the sideline, just berating him out of frustration with what was going on and the fact that Switzer, would never intervene. It was a tough period of time for Aikman.
Golly, I didn't realize it was that contentious. And but what a show, what a doc! America's Team, the Gambler and his Cowboys.
And then obviously the worst part of the whole thing was in their last Super Bowl run. John Blake, who had been a Switzer assistant brought in by Switzer from Oklahoma, was a defensive line coach, shared with Barry some criticism within the locker room, particularly Kevin Williams, former Miami wide receiver first-round pick, that Aikman only criticized, the African-American players, which wasn't true. As Troy said, if Mark Stepnoski or Daryl Johnson or Jay Novacek, made mental mistakes, I'd rip them just the same.
Sure.
And yet Barry, in Troy's mind, Barry sort of legitimized that accusation when he called him into his office and made him account for it. Like, I want you to tell me why this is not true.
Oh, wow.
By doing that, Troy felt, by having that meeting and having to address it with the head coach. And after that, I'm not sure they spoke for a long time after that. And yet they still went and won a Super Bowl against the Steelers.
Incredible. Ed Werder, NFL Cowboys Insider on the Out of Bounds Show. Thanks, Ed. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Bo. Talk to you next week. Appreciate your time.
He's the best. He joined us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. We'll tell you about the new shoes, Wolf and Shepherd, and Martin Dingham, the new shoes that have hit the Rogue Men's Store right there on I-55 North where Spring Street Cigars is. Coming up next.